Great soil means great plants, and winter is the perfect time for building soil health ready for the next growing season. In this video, I'm going to share some of the methods that I use to nourish my soil without the need for expensive bought-in fertilizers and amendments, using materials I can easily source for free or very cheaply. As I'm finishing harvesting my autumn crops, I'm getting more bare beds like this one. Now you can improve soil around actively growing crops too, of course, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But first, let me show you how I'm going to put my bare beds to bed. The aim is to replace all of the nutrients that were taken up by the plants growing here and then lost when it was harvested or cleared away to the compost heap. If we didn't replace these nutrients, the soil would gradually get poorer and the next crops just wouldn't thrive. So to reinvigorate the soil, we need to add organic matter. That's just living materials that have broken down and that we can add to the soil to improve its structure and feed the plants growing in it. Now, two of the very best are garden compost and this stuff, manure, and both of them we'll be using today. This stuff is pretty well aged actually. You can see it's quite crumbly, and any bigger bits like this have all winter to break down into smaller fragments. And that's one of the advantages of spreading organic matter now as winter's approaching. We're not going to be planting anything for 3 or 4 months, which gives nature plenty of time to build our soil. So I'm just going to spread this stuff about 2 inches or 5 centimeters deep like this, and I can use the back of my fork here just to kind of smash apart any bigger bits like that. And I'm trying to get it relatively level, which is easier with this nice crumbly manure. There we go. That looks very pleasing, doesn't it? Beautiful stuff. If you have any wood ash, by the way, now is actually quite a good time to spread it. Just make sure it is pure wood ash, not got any coal ash or sort of treated things or bits of rubbish or anything like that that have also been burnt. We want it nice and pure, and just spread it on a little thin layer like that, and it'll add a good dose of extra nutrients to kind of really zhuzh things up. I could leave it as it is, but to double up, I'm going to add a lovely layer of leaves. Now, my hornbeam hedge here has literally dumped all of its leaves in the last week, and I've been busy scrabbling around to get as many of them as possible. And just look at it. All of this is potential free food that will improve the soil structure, and it's all free. It's just wonderful. Let's get ourselves some of that onto our bed. So I'm going to spread it to a layer of about several inches deep, or like 15 centimeters, something like that. Don't have to be too precise. Now this will help to kind of protect the soil over winter, but crucially, if you are in a colder climate than I am, it will help to insulate the compost or manure underneath here. That means it'll keep it warmer for longer, both the manure and the soil, so all the soil life in it will remain more active for a longer spell. Leaves have a habit of scattering easily, whether due to animals or wind. You can see here in my garlic bed that the leaves have been pulled apart by birds on the hunt for juicy worms. To keep this in place, therefore, I'm just going to squash the leaves down a little bit. I want to keep the air in there. And then I'm going to pop over some netting. You could use any kind of like mesh, or this is actually insect mesh. And then just secure that at the sides to kind of hold the leaves down in place. Now, as it gets wetter and, the winter progresses and things start to break down a bit, these will naturally meld and mesh together, and I can probably remove the netting at that point, but I think this will just keep us all in place until then. If you are somewhere that gets a good amount of snow, well, you're in good luck, because snow will also help to keep things in place and add an extra layer of insulation, which will be very useful indeed. All of those leaves and manure will get gradually incorporated into the soil over the winter, leaving me with a lovely friable structure to plant into come spring. And any leaves that haven't broken down, I can just rake them up and then reapply them later on as mulch. This bed here has actively growing crops in it, but I can still improve the soil by simply laying my organic matter around the plants. Now, the manure I've used in my bare beds is not perfectly decomposed. It's still a bit fresh and young. So that isn't a really good thing to use around my actively growing crops. That's because it's so high in nutrients, mainly nitrogen, that it could actually harm the plant roots by burning them. And so, to err on the side of caution, I'm going to use my garden-made compost instead. Now, this stuff is much safer to use around plants and can be used exactly as it is. There's no danger of harming plants with overly rich matter. If you're using our garden planner, by the way, there are plenty of options for dropping in a compost bin or leaf mould pile onto your plan. You can move it where you want and then scale it up to the correct size. Just noticed there's the gardener's best friend there, little Robin on the compost heap. Isn't he gorgeous? Anyway, now this compost isn't perfectly decomposed. It's still got lots of these little twiggy bits in here, but it's perfectly okay to use around more established plants. So this stuff is a lot less lumpy than the manure, a lot less big clumps. Look at it, it's absolutely gorgeous stuff. So I'm going to spread it about an inch thick, or just over 2 centimetres, and I can go right up to the plant stems. There's no problem with that at all. What we're really doing here is mimicking nature. Now, you rarely see bare soil in nature. It's almost always covered. And that way, all the soil life, from worms to beneficial bacteria to fungi, have always got something to feast on. And they in turn will improve the soil and make sure that the plants can access everything they need, including those vital nutrients. If you wanted, you could also at this stage add some leaves as well, but just make sure not to swamp the plants. They need to breathe. So we've used both manure and compost to feed the soil, and I want to show you a couple of other options. But first, just a few words of caution about using manure. Manure is genuinely amazing stuff, but you need to make sure it's from a trusted source. That's because you do not want any traces of herbicide like aminopyrrolide in it, which could be the case if the horses or cows that have been producing this manure have been grazing on pasture treated with weed killer. Herbicide that persists in the manure can then of course go on to affect your crops and potentially kill them off. So please do ask before sourcing your manure, and if in doubt, look elsewhere. If the only manure you can source is really fresh and still in its rawish state, then you can always just pile it up and leave it well alone for several months so it can break down and mature. And by that stage, it'll look a bit more crumbly like compost. If you don't have access to manure or enough ready to go compost, then you could try making your very own instant compost mix to lay directly onto beds. And it's really simple to do by mixing drier brown materials with fresher greens. So to start with, I've got my wheelbarrow load of dry browns. That's my fallen leaves. And then next up, my greens. Now this could be anything such as weeds without any seeds or roots on them, old cover crops or green manures, for example, or just grass clippings. Anything nice and fresh to counterbalance the drier leaves. And then to mix it all up, I'm just going to use the lawnmower. You know, there are some things in gardening that just please you unlike any other, and one of them is making stuff like this. This is such a pleasing mix of browns and greens, and I'm excited knowing that this is going to really improve my soil. Come on then, darling. And then there are wood chips like these. Now, wood chips are a fantastic source of nutrients for your beds, but I also like to add them to my paths. They create a drier, freer draining surface that is less likely to churn into a muddy mess. Now, the roots of plants in the surrounding beds can still root down and into the paths, while the fungi in the soil will help to release the nutrients trapped in here for the roots of the surrounding crops. Wood chips are a great choice to use around perennial crops like fruit trees and bushes because they will rot down really slowly, releasing their nutrients in a more sustained way. Get your wood chips in place between now and say mid-winter. Now just go through and remove any weeds first and then spread your chips to a depth of about 1 inch or 3 centimetres. Now just be sure to keep the wood chips clear of the stem of your fruit bush because if they sit against it, it might cause issues with rot. Now wood chips need nitrogen to break down because they're very, very high in carbon. Because of this, you absolutely shouldn't dig the wood chips into the soil because what will happen then is they will suck up, if you like, all the nitrogen from the surrounding soil, temporarily locking it up and depriving plants of essential nutrition. However, laid onto the surface like this is just fine. I had to buy my wood chips, but you may be able to source them for free from a local tree surgeon or from websites such as Chip Drop, which connects arborists who make lots of wood chips with gardeners who want them. A win-win relationship. I tell you what, this is incredibly comfortable. A great option if you want to make lovely, rich compost from wood chips is to layer them with something that's rich in nitrogen. For example, fresh green material, or, would you believe it, something like this, manure, lots of nitrogen in that. So what I may do is mix some of this with some of this, layer it together in an out-of-the-way pile and leave it for a year or so to create my own special blend of compost, which I can use more generally around the garden. Looking at these wood chips, you can tell that it's quite fresh, younger material. There are little twiggy bits in here which will be relatively higher in nitrogen. And because there are smaller pieces, they'll rot down nice and quickly too. And look at this, you can see from this bit here, it's got slightly white deposits on it, like ash. That's a really great sign. That's the mycelium of the fungi already working on these wood chips to kind of break them down. So it's really good stuff. Between wood chips, local manures, gathered up leaves and harvested green materials, you will have all you need to build healthy soil and keep your plants in glorious health. Don't forget to nourish yourself too, and I've just the ticket for that, the free abridged version of my book, which is yours completely free simply for signing up to our video newsletter. In it you'll find more than 100 pages of practical advice, step-by-step projects and inspirational ideas. Get it pinged to your inbox today just by scanning the QR code or following the link. I will catch you next time.